Make sure you guys hit the subscribe button if you guys are enjoying the content that we're throwing up. And make sure you guys hit the like button if you enjoy the video. And yeah, let's begin. There is a house in New Orleans they call the rising sun, and it's been the ruin of many a poor boy. Oh God, I know I'm one. I love that song. Dude, the animals were amazing. Like, we gotta get out of this place if it's the last thing we ever do. Dude, the animals were amazing. How are you guys doing? How are you guys doing this morning? You guys doing good? It's 9:15 a.m. as I'm recording this, and we have reached it. The beginning of Secret Wars. Unanimously, you guys voted in the comment section that you wanted to see me remaster Secret Wars. So we are remastering Secret Wars. Now, here's what we're gonna do. We're gonna kick this off. We're gonna kind of skip Secret Wars issue number 0 because it's not really that important. We covered it last time around, but it's basically just the Future Foundation, right? The little kids who were building the life raft, and that's basically it. Not really all that relevant. Instead, what we're gonna do here is we're gonna kind of jump back a little bit, and we're gonna pick up 178 days before the final Incursion. Now, a lot of you guys asked this question when we recorded this. We had Captain America's Mighty Avengers, which had basically become Captain America's Secret Avengers, right? Steve Rogers' Secret Avengers team. And a lot of guys are kind of asking, how did Blue Marvel get involved in all this and all that kind of stuff? And so what we end up doing here is we pick up at the Gym Theater, which is where the Mighty Avengers headquarters located. Now, if you are curious about how this team formed, as well as a lot of the members that are in it, you can find that in a video down in the description. It'll basically be the Mighty Avengers video that we did, where Doctor Strange ended up basically resurrecting Shumagorath, or bringing Shumagorath into the Marvel Universe, right? That was during the events of Infinity, and that's where the Mighty Avengers, or I guess the second version of the Mighty Avengers, reformed. But you got Steve Rogers here, and Steve Rogers basically approached the group before the big battle that we saw between the Mighty Avengers, the Illuminati, and Amadeus Cho's Avengers team. And he basically explains to them that like the multiverse is ending. And so with all this kind of being explained by Steve Rogers, and it's actually put very succinctly in this bit of an explanation here, right? The way that Al Ewing does it. And I think it's probably one of the easiest explanations to understand, right? Steve Rogers explains the incursions as like, being in the supermarket and there's a pyramid of cans, and somebody pulls one of the cans out from the bottom and the whole structure comes crashing down. Except instead of cans, you're talking about entire universes, which is a really good way to put the way the incursions were going on. Because one of the drawbacks to Hickman, as much as I love his writing, he can be a little wordy, and he'll use 10 words when 5 will do. And so I think that's kind of one of the downsides, although I still love his writing. And so basically it's kind of Steve Rogers explaining like, the Illuminati, the issue that they have is that in the beginning of all this, I tried to use the Infinity Gauntlet, right? And the Infinity Gauntlet worked to stop that one incursion, but we destroyed all the gems in the process except for the time stone, which started yanking me through time. But notice this, the immediate response of Luke Cage is, wait. So you're telling me that the Illuminati have known about this the entire time, and so did you, right? Like you were part of that original Illuminati group. Now, Luke Cage doesn't have the full story, but the response of Steve Rogers is, don't judge me. And it's one of these things where he's kind of like, well, it's different when I do it, right? But remember, the full story about all this is that yes, Steve Rogers originally knew what was going on with the incursions, and he told the Illuminati, we can't destroy worlds, right? Like we have to spare innocent lives. And it's kind of funny because, of course, his mind was wiped, which is what he tells everybody. That's why I didn't tell you before, because I didn't know until not too long ago when Original Sin happened and these memories were restored to me. But at the end of the day, the Mighty Avengers are kind of split, right? White Tiger is like, they're doing this to save entire universes. And the issue that Captain America has is, but like they're taking innocent lives. And the reality of this, and this is an important thing to understand, not even trying to give Steve Rogers a hard time or call him dumb or anything like that. The reality of this is, I think the Illuminati made the right call, right? Like there comes a point when you really have to make that choice. And that's the important thing here is Steve Rogers takes this stance that like all life is important. No, it's not either, right? Like not all life is important. That's just the way that it is. The big argument that Steve Rogers had is that in his mind, he saw the Illuminati and those guys becoming as bad as the people they were fighting. And there is that argument does kind of go around, right? It's one that a lot of people really have in the real world, that when you're fighting an enemy, if you become as bad as the enemy you're fighting, then ultimately you become that enemy. But that's not true, right? It's Machiavellian. It's like dating 101. If you're struggling because of the fact that you're struggling with like all the bad boys taking the girls, then learn to be Machiavellian. Be a good guy, but don't be afraid to take some literature from the handbook on how to be a dick, right? Like don't become a terrible person yourself, but borrow their tactics from time to time. And that's kind of what this required, right? That's what this was. It was, don't become a villain, but don't be afraid to use some of the tactics the villains use. So long as you keep your eye on the prize, you're not going to lose your way. And that's the biggest issue with Captain America is he was always so narrow-minded and always so focused on always making sure they do the right things that he didn't really seem to understand the concept that sometimes in order to do the right thing, you got to do some bad things, right? That sometimes the ends really do justify the means. But because of that, again, there's a kind of rift here in the Mighty Avengers team. Not everybody's on board. And Steve Rogers tells them, make your choice, right? Either you can side with me or you can side with them, but it's not going to be the same thing. Now, the other part of this is that the team kind of starts turning on Sam Wilson because Sam Wilson also had knowledge of this, right? Remember, Captain America is coming to them after he learned everything and is kind of dumping this information. But Sam Wilson knew before anybody else in the Mighty Avengers knew. And so the fact that he didn't come to them and tell them as part of their team kind of pisses them off. But one of the things that you kind of get here is you get this sort of jumping forward through days, right? From here, we jump to 84 days to live. And what you basically end up having here is essentially, volunteers from the Mighty Avengers, because remember, unlike the main Avengers team, where it's largely just composed of superpowered beings, the Mighty Avengers was kind of a blend between Heroes for Hire and the Avengers team. Insofar as you had the main Mighty Avengers roster, Luke Cage, White Tiger, Blue Marvel, Spectrum, so on and so forth. But what you also had were basically people who were out there trying to help the world and not necessarily having superpowers. And one of the things that's kind of asked here is while the world is learning about the incursions, not everybody really sees it as like one of the biggest things in the world, right? That at the end of the day, like, yes, the universe and the world is dying, but like, what are you going to do to stop it? On the other side of the equation, you have people who are kind of taking political stances to this. You pick up with like 26 days before the world ends, and you have some political pundits who are just like, these are terrorist planets, right? They're bad guys, they're enemies, they're enemy combatants, and we have to treat them that way, right? So, Warhawk, hyper military, those kind of guys, the ones that you don't really listen to because they're, just disregard them. But then you also have like the ultra super progressives, right? Who were just like, we gotta, help them and help them understand that, that we can save the multiverse. The other ones you don't listen to either, right? Like the people on the extreme sides of the spectrum. One of the things you also get here is Peter Corbeau. And Peter Corbeau is an old standing member of really the X-Men roster more so than anything else. He was just a really, really old friend of Charles Xavier's. But again, it's one of these things where the other, another major issue that the Mighty Avengers are dealing with, and something that kind of flies under the radar, are mass suicides, right? People who are just like the world is ending, and instead of like facing the world ending, they just kind of take their own life. That the world is responding to this in a multitude of different ways. Now, the world's response, which is to say the average human's response to this, is actually going to become an amazing talking point once we get to like Blue Marvel, right? Like the role that Blue Marvel plays in all this. But then you also have the conspiracy theorists, right? The people that you never listen to. The guy who's like Stanford was an inside job, and all that kind of stuff. It's kind of like, okay, whatever, man. Like, but nonetheless, you pick up with 19 Days to Live. And this 19 Days to Live is basically like when the fight began to break out between Captain America's Avengers team and like the Illuminati. But once we get to 14 Days to Live, this is when you end up having like Blue Marvel stepping in. And this is a super cool moment here. And I was so glad to see it when I saw it, because I was like, man, dude, it's about time somebody recognized this, right? So once the battle's over, you've got the Illuminati, who are talking to Captain America, but you've got Reed Richards and Black Panther who kind of stood to the side, and they were talking to Blue Marvel. And Reed Richards kind of says, man, like that was a crazy fight, and it probably could have ended a lot quicker, Adam Brashear, because you were holding back. And had you not been holding back, you probably could have ended our whole movement pretty quickly, right? He could have ended this all super fast. And the kind of response that he says here is, having the Avengers actually talk to each other, Spectrum says having our Avengers talk to each other is all we really wanted. And then in turn, Blue Marvel's like, yeah, these nonsensical squabbles really have gone on too long. And when facing something like this, we're vastly stronger acting together than we are apart. And Reed takes that as kind of a heartening response, in the sense that Blue Marvel's like, yeah, this guy finally understands. And the response of Adam is, no, you're totally misunderstanding, Reed. Like, I didn't say that because I think you're making the right move here. I'm saying that because you're wrong. You've been wrong this entire time. And everything that's happened here has been your fault from the very start. And Black Panther's kind of like, no, we've been working on different things. And I assume you have too, Adam Brashear. You've been trying to find a way to stop the incursions, and you haven't been able to do it, right? Nothing that you've been able to work on has been able to stop it. And at the end of the day, Spectrum's kind of like, but you're still not listening. And the question's like, why? And Adam Brashear's response was, because you could have talked to all of us. You could have talked to the rest of us. And hearing that come from Adam Brashear really does kind of change things. Like, it kind of changes my perspective, because my initial response to this was, okay, what good would it do to talk to all these various superheroes out there? But the funny thing about this is Adam Brashear really is smart. And I feel like Adam Brashear, having been left out of all that, is really kind of an indication of two things. One, that in Marvel Comics, Adam Brashear Panther is woefully underrated. He's painfully underused. But the other part of this is that within the Marvel Universe, he's not really appreciated as a guy. Is he one of the top 10 smartest people in the world? Absolutely. And it's kind of a funny thing because he tells like Black Panther and he tells Reed Richards, you should have talked to us. A lot of the people out there, sure, they're not as smart as you are, but you literally have intelligent kids who are helping you build a raft. Why? Because kids have imagination, because they think about things that you wouldn't normally be able to think of. And using that line of logic and then canceling out all the other superheroes makes no sense, right? It's kind of nonsensical. And it's a cool thing because that's true, because in response, you have Black Panther who says, what Adam Brashear says that like, have you ever considered that the other 7 billion of us on the world might have liked to have had a say in things? The response of Black Panther is, have you asked them? You know, like, have you asked that at all? And that's actually a great point to raise, because what you're seeing is that in response to the end of the world, there's mass panic, mass hysteria, mass suicides. People are responding predictably. And that's kind of justifies the Illuminati's actions. You can't trust the average person with such a mind-blowing piece of information, because only two things are going to happen. Either they're going to refuse to believe it because it's just not what they want to believe, or they're going to panic. No real constructive narrative can come out of telling 7 billion people in the world, hey guys, so the world is ending, the universe is ending too. You can't tell people that. And so at this point, we transition away from that and we jump directly into Secret Wars number 1. We officially start Secret Wars. Now remember, this is the final incursion between Marvel's Ultimate Universe and the main Marvel Universe. These are the last two worlds in existence. Now, something that I also want to specify here, a lot of you guys asked the question early on in the story, and I don't remember if we answered this already, but a lot of you guys asked the question early on in the story. You said, okay, so what we have here are incursions. We have worlds crashing into each other. If two Earths crash into each other, it wipes out both universes. But if you destroy one of the Earths, then the universe that doesn't have an Earth just passes through the other universe and nothing happens, right? So all you have to do is destroy one world and the day is saved. So what do we have? Like, what about the universes where those Earths were already saved? Where like those Earths were either destroyed by the superheroes who resided in that universe, right? They evacuated their Earth, they blew the Earth up and saved their universe, or the universes where the Earths were destroyed by the other incursion. Those universes should be okay, and they should be fine, and they should be floating around out there. That's a very, very good question to ask. And the answer to that question came when Dr. Doom unleashed the Molecule Men on the Beyonders, right? Like all that energy being set off, like it was just like this massive multiversal bomb. And whatever universes exist out there were destroyed by that bomb in the process, leaving only the main Marvel Universe and the Ultimate Universe. Now, the question you kind of have to ask here is why these two worlds, or like why these two universes? Like, shouldn't they have been destroyed in the process? Sure. But it's just storytelling, and that's basically it. But the idea here is that with the Ultimate Universe facing off against the main Marvel Universe, and I like to consider the Ultimate Universe the MCU, I feel like it makes it a lot more exciting. But the kind of question here that's being asked of Nick Fury, of the maker of this alternate reality version of Reed Richards, is how much time do we have left? Maker's response is, okay, normally we would have 8 hours from the time that the incursive Earth appears until the time they collide. But because of the fact that there are no other universes there, because that's it, basically we have like an hour before this incursion happens, right? So literally they're just flying towards each other. And a lot of this is really chalked up to the explosion that led to the destruction of all the other universes, right? Basically like this massive explosion just pushed these two on a collision course faster. But whatever the logic is, the result is that they have an hour before either both worlds end or one of the worlds is destroyed. The other part of this is that Maker doesn't really tell Nick Fury that there is no chance to win, right? He doesn't tell him there's no way for them to succeed. He just kind of lets Nick Fury believe that if they dispatch the Ultimates and all their helicarriers from the Triskelion into the main Marvel Universe onto that Earth, that like they can probably overpower those heroes and they can probably take the day. But Thanos, remember, Thanos and the Cabal are on the Ultimate Universe, right? They're there with Ultimate Universe Reed Richards. And Thanos asked the question, why lie? You know, like why lie in the midst of all this, right? I mean, they never really had a chance to win. Why not just tell them that? And the response of Reed is because it wouldn't do any good. And when Thanos says like everybody deserves to know when their time is up, right? People should know when there is no chance for them to fight anymore and just give themselves over to death. The response of Reed is it's not about that. It's about buying time. That's all it is. These guys are cannon fodder. They don't know they're cannon fodder, but that's all they are. Right now, switch over to a couple things going on here. The first is the life raft of Reed Richards, right? The main Marvel Universe has its own life raft, and that was Reed and Valeria's answer to the idea of not losing, right? They can't win, but they cannot lose. And the only way to not lose is to build a raft using materials made of adamantium, vibranium, and also using basically material from the Living Tribunal itself in order to, you know, solidify this vessel in such a way way to where it can navigate what would be the multiversal space, because there are no materials out there that exist in humanity that could survive the crashing of two universes into each other. That's why the death of the living tribunal was so important, because part of the living tribunal's body can be used to reinforce this vessel and ensure that it does survive the crushing of these two universes, right? Now, there are other things kind of being thrown in there, but the idea here is that it's literally just grabbing as many people as they possibly can, because the reality of this is that Reed and them hope that they could possibly stop the incursions, or at least stop this final incursion. But once this final incursion started kicking off, and then once the Ultimate Universe immediately dispatched their helicarriers and all their different superheroes to the main Marvel Universe, then it became apparent there's no reasoning with these guys. There's no rationalizing with these guys. All we can do is basically stockpile as many resources as we can and just try to save the day. The other part of this is that they've also lost scientists, that in response to everything that's going on, two of their specialists, right, in chemistry and physics, decided to stay behind and be with their families in the end of times. Now, it's not the biggest loss in the world, and Reed even says they were basically redundancies, right? They were backup scientists. So it's not the end of the world that we don't have them. You know, you also have like the X-Men, you have Beast who left the X-Men behind. But the big thing about this is there's two expected scenarios between Reed and T'Challa, and that's why they have Manifold. Remember, Manifold is the guy, Eden, who can teleport to different locations or bring people to him. All he has to do is know that the need is there. And so the idea is that, one, they basically get, you know, everything kind of goes as planned. They launch with their resurrection team, you know, and that's it. Manifold teleports on board and the day's saved, right? So the idea is that Manifold is basically going to reach out into the world and start plucking out different superheroes from where they are and say, okay, we'll bring them here. And then once all those superheroes are brought here, you know, protection roles, different things like that, that basically Manifold will teleport back and they'll say, okay guys, cool, we got everybody, let's go, you know, and just ride off into the sunset. The worst case scenario is that Manifold saves the day, but he doesn't make it. And the funny thing about this is everything that can go wrong is going to go wrong, right? Because the first thing that happens here is you've got Iron Man from the Ultimate Universe, you know, Tony Stark, who basically who flies to this location and brings his entire weapons platform with him. And then of course he faces off against Carol Danvers, and that's more or less that. You've got Luke Cage who's trying to tend to the day as best they can. Literally, you have Storm, you have Thor, who are using their powers to, you know, take down one of the helicarriers, and that's really what's happening here. The forces of S.H.I.E.L.D. from the Ultimate Universe are being wildly overpowered, because where the Ultimate Universe was rooted more in real life, the main Marvel Universe was rooted more in fantasy. And so in a lot of ways, this is the answer to the question, what would happen if the Marvel Cinematic Universe and the Marvel Comics Universe went to war with each other? The Marvel Cinematic Universe would be vastly overpowered. They'd be wildly overpowered and crushed by a huge margin. But the other thing is that in the middle of all this, Sentinels come flying in. Now, the Sentinels are controlled by Cyclops and Nation X, right? The X-Men have arrived, and Cyclops shows up here with the Phoenix Egg. And that's what's nuts, is because in addition to whatever forces the Avengers have, which are enough to seemingly take out the helicarriers of S.H.I.E.L.D., now Sentinels are here, and these massive Sentinels start crushing everything. Now, the other part of this is that She-Hulk, the Incredible Hulk, Colossus, Nightcrawler, they all start realizing that all these are coming from a particular vessel, that they're all being dispatched from this one particular ship. And the only way to really shut down communications between like Iron Man and the various, you know, Ultimate characters who were here on the main Marvel Universe and the Ultimate Universe itself is to destroy that vessel. And that's exactly what they do, right? You basically end up getting the fastball special, which is normally Colossus throwing Wolverine. Instead, is Colossus throwing the Incredible Hulk. Sends him flying up into that vessel. He basically destroys, or at least, you know, attacks the Triskelion, takes out the Triskelions' communication array, and that in turn cuts off their communications to all the helicarriers. So now all the helicarriers out there are not necessarily flying blind, but they can't talk back, they can't call for reinforcements or anything like that. You in turn end up having the Maker who finally launches his move. And the response to this is, okay, with the Triskelion down, with all that being sorted out, now it's time for us to basically launch our final attack. And so what ends up happening is, of course, the dome starts to open up. Now remember, we talked about this in our video on Ultimate Read, right, which you'll find down as part of the best comic book stories of all time playlist down in the description. But this version of Read, you know, constructed this massive dome where time passed differently. Time passed faster within the dome. Read himself, you know, made himself immune to it. But the idea was that basically time would, I think it was something like 1,000 years of evolution took place inside this dome, which means that the various weapon systems that are here on this dome are 1,000 times more powerful than what's already there in the Ultimate Universe. And so Maker ends up launching all these different just hyper advanced ships directly into the main Marvel Universe. The funny thing about this is that stowing away on one of these is Miles Morales. that Miles Morales is, during his time as Spider-Man, had come across all this. Now, a lot of that was explained in Miles Morales Spider-Man going into Secret Wars, going into this, but once these vessels arrive, they start unleashing holy hell, like literally just fire and brimstone, just raining it down on all the superheroes. And despite all their power, like it's obvious that this is basically the end of it, right? Like there's no real way to come out on top here. And so what you end up getting is this amazing moment, right? It's kind of this small little moment, but this amazing moment. Those of you guys who read this originally, when we covered this originally, you guys know what's coming. What you end up getting here is Frank Castle showing up, right? You've got an email that's sent out by Wilson Fisk, the Kingpin, to all these various villains that he's worked with over the years, and even some that he hasn't, and basically says, like, all of you, I dreamed of a glorious end, right? Me standing over the vanquished as the world looked up in envy, but it seems time that fickle mistress has robbed us all of such an opportunity. So I say this, if the world is truly ending, let it end thusly, with drink and joy at the sight of our enemy's greatest failure. Please join me for a most raucous celebration at the place where we met that time for the thing. I'm buying, sincerely, Wilson Fisk. All the various villains show up here, right? And it's considered to be a place where like nobody can get access to. Nobody knows about it. That's why he left this, kind of ambiguous message, that time for the thing that we did, right? And so it's like, okay, cool. So like we're all gonna meet up at this one spot and only the villains know about it. Now, while they're all enjoying their drinks and they're watching the heroes fail and they're watching these super advanced weapons from the Ultimate Universe show up and just start raining down fire and brimstone, and there's no real way for the heroes to win, here comes Frank Castle. And he says, gentlemen, they say that when you die, you can't take it with you, which begs the question, what exactly am I gonna do with all these bullets? He cocks his gun back, switch back to the battle, right? And it's just like, man, that's amazing. It's so cool, right? So with all this fire and brimstone raining down, immediately part of the resurrection team is taken out, right? Like part of Reed Richards, team is gone. It's kind of like, okay, so like a lot of the resources that they had here, a lot of the things that they needed in order to resurrect themselves properly are gone, right? There doesn't really seem to be any real method of resurrecting the heroes anymore. Black Widow, Hawkeye, these guys are all basically dead. And so in turn, it's kind of like, Black Panther tells Manifold, okay, so like time for plan 2. And so in response, with everything going on, Manifold ends up firing up, right? Ends up using his powers, and while that happens, he ends up basically, snatching up all these different characters. Star-Lord gets grabbed. You end up having Carol Danvers and Thor who gets snatched away. Spider-Man Peter Parker gets snatched away. But while all that's happening, you have Cyclops, where the Phoenix egg finally hatches, and he reaches inside and basically imbues himself with the entirety of the Phoenix Force. And so while all this fire and brimstone's being rained down by the Ultimate Universe, right, with these super advanced ships that have been brought there by the Ultimate Universe version of Reed, suddenly Cyclops emerges with the Phoenix and it's dead, right? It's just lights out. It's just boom, 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 boom. Ship after ship after ship just gets annihilated, right? Like the vast power of the Phoenix Force. Like, and so with that, like in that moment, it's like, okay, Cyclops is teleported aboard by Manifold. They have everybody that they need. And the response of Reed is go. Like we have to get out, right? Like it's obvious we can't stop this incursion. There's nothing we can do here. The Ultimate Universe does the exact same thing and launches their ship as well. Cyclops is teleported aboard with the full totality of the Phoenix Force and they bail, right? They're just like, go. Like they launch the ship, fly into the incursion point, right? The point between these two worlds where they're getting ready to collide. The issue with this is that the worlds are literally being ripped apart by tidal forces, right? They're within the Roche limit, right? Those of you guys who don't know what that is, whenever you see a movie, like for example, if any of you guys ever saw Melancholia, and if you never did, look up the ending for it. Well, there's a point where like a giant world that's about, I don't know, maybe 4 or 5 times the size of Earth crashes into the Earth. The reality is that wouldn't happen. And even right now, what you have is two Earths crashing into each other. That's not really what would happen, right? They wouldn't actually impact each other. What would end up happening is the tidal forces of these worlds would pull themselves apart. And that's what would take place, right? If you had a planet that was 4 times the size of Earth that was careening towards Earth, you'd get to the Roche limit, which is the point where the gravitational pull of that world is so intense that it would literally start ripping the Earth to pieces, right? It would just start ripping out huge chunks of the planet. Physics and science is crazy, but the idea is that they end up flying in between the incursion point, which seems to be the best place for them to be. The problem with this is all these massive storms and all this craziness going on. One of the gravitational attacks ends up ripping off a portion of the life raft, right? Which contains Susan Storm, Valeria, and Franklin Richards. And because all of this happens so incredibly fast that with Susan, Johnny Storm, like with basically every member of Reed's family except for himself, right? Like it's literally like Ben Grimm, Susan Storm, Johnny Storm, Franklin, and Valeria. He does what he can, right? Like Susan basically fires up her force field to keep them from like disintegrating into the space of nothingness, essentially. And so you end up having like this shield that immediately comes up in response to that, right? You know, around the life craft. And so Reed's like, T'Challa let the shield down. And he's like, dude, if we do that, it's gonna crush everything, right? Like right now, the shield capacity is at 92%. I can do this, Reed, but if I open this door and shield integrity gets below 90%, I have to close it back. Otherwise, we're gonna lose everything. And the response of Reed is, that's all I need, right? So this door takes 5 seconds, right? This shield takes 5 seconds to open, right? So you've got Reed Richards standing there, right? Like standing on this edge, just waiting to like reach out and grab this vessel and yank it back in within the life raft, right? So you got Reed standing there, you got Susan Storm using her force field and holding this entire thing together, right? Now, one thing to understand, Susan Storm is not just holding this together, her force field is holding off the collapse of a universe. She's literally holding 2 universes apart with her force field. But in this moment, you basically get this countdown, right? You get 5, you get 4, 3, 2, the shield starts to come undone. You get to 1, the shield totally fails. Susan Storm, Franklin, Valeria, Johnny Storm, Ben Grimm are just yanked away, right? They just disappear into nothingness, and there's nothing Reed can do. He loses his entire family in that instant. The worlds collide, and what's left of the multiverse has totally been destroyed. The only survivors of this multiversal collapse are those who were in the Ultimate Universe life raft, those who were in the life raft in the main Marvel Universe, and they're only protected by the energy they use from the Living Tribunal to kind of create that shield. And the only other people there are the Molecule Man Owen Reese, Dr. Stephen Strange, and Doctor Doom. The end of the Marvel Universe has happened. With that being said, guys, we're gonna bring this video to an end. If you are new here to Comics Explained, make sure you guys hit the sub button to become part of the Rob Corps. If you guys enjoyed this video, make sure you drop a like, and I will catch you all later. Peace.